Blizzard has just released their first patch since 2020 onto the StarCraft 2 servers. In between, we've had community patches, community councils, balance councils consisting of creators, professional players, tournament organizers, but this is the first Blizzard patch we've had in over 5 years. I believe August 2020 was the last balance update Blizzard made to StarCraft 2, and now they're back with 5.0.15. It is live. So let's go over the changes, see what is happening over here. We are happy to bring 5.0.15 live, which contains various balance changes, bug fixes, and quality of life improvements. We want to thank all the community contributors who provided valuable feedback during our PTR period. Starting with Zerg. Zerg, Spire cost reduced from 200 to 150 150. Spire build time has been reduced from 71 seconds to 66 seconds. Centrifugal hooks now give +5 HP bonus to banelings again. This was a revert from earlier. Microbial Shroud reduces range attacks by 50% damage. Microbial Shroud effect no longer persists for a few seconds after the unit has left the Shroud, so you don't have the sticky effect anymore on the Shroud. Microbial Shroud cost increase from 75 to 100 energy, so that's an energy increase. And Microbial Shroud now requires an upgrade again of 150 minerals and 150 gas. So we see a focus on trying to bring Mutaling Baneling and Baneling play back in general. Mutaling Bane probably for the Zerg versus Terran matchup, and Baneling focused attack I think in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup or Zerg versus Protoss. On top of that, we also see a kind of a global late game buff for Zerg with the addition of pretty much a budget Dark Swarm in Microbial Shroud. Reducing range attacks to, by 50% damage is going to be a severe nerf to Immortals, Marines, Marauders, Ghost, Stalkers, basically anything that has range over here. I think in Zerg versus Protoss, this is going to have a huge effect on how the late game is being played right now. I think compositions like Ultra Infestor might make a comeback. Ultra Infestor Hydra, Ultra Infestor Corruptor. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Zergs are going to be cooking up over there. The Baneling, the Baneling HP bonus means that perhaps Banelings are going to be more common. Right now, Storm stops pretty much everything, but perhaps with the +5 HP bonus, Banelings are just going to be a little bit stronger there. So this to me, the Zerg changes are the most interesting ones because I think it might enable completely new playstyles with Microbial Shroud. It brings back some older playstyles that were missing, specifically in ZVT, the Mutaling Bane. I'm actually very excited to see what this is going to bring. I think it's going to bring some fresh ideas to every single matchup and bring back some much beloved styles that we haven't seen in a while in the main meta game. Up next, we're going to go over the Protoss changes. So we're starting with Energy Recharge. The Energy Recharge grant has been reduced from 100 to 50 energy, so half. So 1 energy on the Nexus now translates to 1 energy on a unit or onto a battery. Energy recharge cooldown has been reduced from 60 to 45 seconds. So although you get less energy, you can cast it more frequently. That means that energy recharge is a more economically expensive ability as a result, right? You could use a chrono boost on probes, which would get you X amount of extra minerals because your probes are coming out faster and thus will mine quicker. Instead of that, you now will need to use more of this spell if you want 100 extra energy on a Templar or 100 extra energy on a Sentry. This nerfs Sentry builders quite a bit economically because you're going to have 1 or maybe even 2 less chrono boost. It will make initial defenses with Templar a little bit harder as well, specifically against Terran. So I think these are fine changes. I do believe that Energy Recharge was a little bit overbuffed. Also, the Oracle with Endless Energy might have been a little bit too strong. So I think this is a change for a good directional change here on the Energy Recharge. Absolutely. Mothership. Mothership movement speed has been reduced from 2.83 to 2.25. Mothership can't be abducted anymore since the last Community Council patch. So I think this is kind of as a response to that. I personally would have preferred seeing the abduct being brought back onto the Mothership. I never was a huge fan of that change from the very start. I think every unit should be capable of being abducted. I think that is kind of the point of a Viper. It's a tier 3 spellcaster. If you make all these exceptions that the Viper can't grab, then it feels kind of weird. And there's already counters to the Viper in feedback, or you got the snipe with the Ghost or the EMP with the Ghost. So I'm not a huge fan of that change in the past. I think this, if you want to make the Mothership more vulnerable, This is a good way to make the mothership more vulnerable, specifically against Zerg, where right now the only real solution to the mothership is to snipe it with Corruptors. Psionic Storm changed from 80 damage over 3 seconds to 140 damage over 6 seconds. So that's a DPS decrease of 26.7 to 23.3. The radius has been increased from 1.5 to 2, and the range has been reduced from 9 to 8. Now, all these changes together, you look at that and you might be a bit confused. I think initially the plan was, with this patch, the first PTR that we saw was that it was going to be a Storm nerf, but a radius increase of 1.5 to 2 means an area increase of the spell of about 77%, which is, in my mind, a huge buff. The damage over a larger zone, over a longer period of time, is a massive buff as well. I mean, 80 damage to 140 damage, so that means against sieged up lurkers, for example, or units that are slower moving, like roaches, that tend to clump up a little bit. I think Storm is actually going to be stronger now than it was before the patch. The range has been reduced due to the radius increase, obviously. So I think the effective range remains pretty much the same. I personally think this is a buff to Storm. I mean, longer time, so better for zoning, better for stopping units that are very slow moving, better for units that are sieged up. I think in combination with the Baneling buff, Banelings might be slightly better against Storm because they move at a fairly high speed, so they might just run through it quick enough, and they might manage to survive a little bit longer than before. But I think this is making the strongest tool that Protoss already had when it came to AoE a little bit stronger. I'm personally not a huge fan of that. TOS has 3 realistic forms of kind of large-scale AoE: Colossus, Disruptor, Storm. In the current, or in the previous live game in patch 5.0.14, Storm already was the best option in almost every situation. PvT best option, PvZ absolutely the best option. In PvP, we hardly ever see any real splash. Sometimes we see disruptors, but let's not talk about that. So I think you're making something that's already very strong, a little bit more all around, which I personally would prefer being forced into picking certain types of splash against different compositions, so that disruptors are better against roach, that Storm is better against Baneling Ling. So you actually have to strategically counter with these things, and your opponent can play against that. So they see a Templar, they're like, oh, they have a lot of Templar. In that case, I maybe want to build roaches or lurkers, and then they'd have to transition into disruptors. But right now it feels like Storm is kind of a catch-all AoE response, and it will remain that way, and might have even become more all-round strong. I think it's kind of odd, specifically even that one of the main concerns in this patch was the weakness of Terran in the Terran versus Protoss matchup. One Storm comes out, and I don't think this is going to change very much. I think these interactions will remain very similar. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this. I think a slight nerf to Storm and maybe a slight buff to Disruptors, I wouldn't have minded. Up next, Dark Templar Blink attack delay reduced from 0.75 to 0.25. I've been a fan of this. I've suggested this before. It feels like we hardly ever see DTs anymore in late game situations. Terrans have gotten really good at dealing with them as well onto their planetaries. I know that when I suggested this personally, I got a lot of lower level players that sent me messages and were like, hey, DTs are actually a huge problem at lower levels with the Blink against Terran specifically. Please don't undo this change. This is the only reason why I can sometimes hold my planetaries. So I've suggested this before, but after that, insane amount of feedback that I received from lower level Terrans, I'm not entirely sure about it. This is not a complete removal. There's still a bit of a delay, but it is 0.5 seconds less. I just personally, I didn't know that Dark Templar Blink was so extremely common at lower level games, that the Terran community below Masters, they let me know in emails and Instagram DMs and letters to my house. No, they didn't do that, but they were upset. All right, they were upset when I mentioned it before, so I'll bet you they're going to be upset now. Up next, Surveillance Mode now reveals the observer, and Surveillance Mode increases vision from 13.75 to 15. This feels really bad. I've played with this. The surveillance mode on the Overseer feels kind of good because it's a pretty bulky unit with a lot of HP that can also move quite quickly once you get pneumatized carapace. The Observer is insanely slow, so you put that in surveillance mode and then your opponent sees it. By the time you've unsieged it and started waddling in the air jellyfish style with your observer, you're trying to get away from it, you're going to get scanned and killed. And it also just feels unnatural, kind of the switching between invisibility and visibility when I played with it. I didn't super love how it felt. I also kind of like that the observer is always invisible, but I would have preferred having some other type of way of showing that a unit is there, but still forcing Terrans to scan it out every single time. I think we're going to see a lot of static observers in surveillance mode just getting sniped. And it feels weird. It's such a low HP unit. So yeah, I don't know. Not a huge fan personally. Up next, Purification Nova cooldown, or Purification cooldown reduced from 21.4 to 17 seconds. So going to be capable of shooting more Purification Novas. There's no other changes, so you can just shoot more of them. They still remain quite weak. They can't one-shot Marauders, which is their main use. They can still one-shot Ghost, and that's something that we've seen them do in the past again and again and again. I think this is probably a good change. It felt like the Disruptor was a little bit weak. I'm not sure if this is exactly the correct thing you want to do, but I like I said, I would have liked to see a little bit of power from Storm go into non-Storm AoE. And now you're kind of buffing both. It might make the Disruptor a little bit better, but I still think Storm is a bit too strong. All right, then ending with the Terran changes. Siege Tank can no longer be abducted when in siege mode. Now, the same thing as with the Mothership earlier. I'm just not a huge fan of this. I feel like you're making the Viper significantly weaker against Terran and against Protoss when you remove units that it can abduct. It feels very odd to me as well. I know you still have Blinding Cloud, but Abduct really, against mech compositions, I think is great to have. I think in a lot of situations against Turtly Terrans is great to have as well. So I'm not a huge fan of this particular change. The Viking cost has been reduced from 150 minerals, 75 gas, to 125 minerals and 75 gas. So a 25 mineral deduction. I think this is going to have a very minor impact. I think if you decrease the gas, it probably has a bigger impact on how quickly you can get them out. Terran can struggle a little bit with gas in the mid game when they're kind of on 2.5, 3 bases. So I don't think it's going to be super impactful personally. Drilling Claws effectiveness increased from 1.07 to 0.71, so they burrow a little bit quicker. Hyperflight Rotors research time decreased from 100 to 79. That's very cool. That allows you to get the Hyperflight Rotors out while you're building Banshees. So right now, if you build 2 Banshees, which is a very standard number if you're going into Bio, build 2 Banshees and you start Hyperflight Rotors, you have like a 15-second window, I think it is, or so, 16, 18-second window in which you are just waiting for your Hyperflight Rotors to finish up. And it feels bad because it makes your build very inefficient. With this particular change, it will allow Terrans to make a decision between, do I want speed on the Banshees or do I want cloak on the Banshees? And then we could see something like double Banshee with Hyperflight Rotors into Bio still. Because right now, whenever we see Hyperflight Rotors, we often see it as more of like a luxury upgrade when you're playing mech. And you start with the cloak, then you get the Hyperflight Rotor. So I think this is going to increase opening diversity for Terran a little bit in the TVP matchup and in the TVZ matchup as well. And I think that is generally good. I'm a huge fan of this change. Like, I think this is, out of all of them, I think I could make a decent argument against and for the change. I think for this one, I think it's just, in my subjective opinion, it's an objectively good change. So I like this one a lot. Then we have the Liberator sight reduced from 10 to 9. That means it can see the entire circle. There is a bug fix with the Liberator where siege is a little bit faster. You don't have to slow down as much. So the way that it worked, it looked weird. I was not personally a huge fan of this sight range reduction. It does fix some issues where you give more flexibility to map makers because a single Liberator can't harass from certain spots now. So I think that is the main reason why this got introduced, to increase flexibility for map makers with certain types of high grounds and positions between naturals, thirds, fourths, that type of stuff. But it felt weird when I saw it in action, and it kind of looked weird. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just too much of a StarCraft 2 conservative. I want things to remain the same. Then the final 2 changes are with the Ghost. Ghost supply reduced from 3 to 2, and the Ghost now has the light attribute. This is something that I've personally been a fan of making the Ghost have the light attribute. That means they're weaker against Banelings, weaker against Colossus as well. So they still have that role as a very strong spellcaster, but they kind of they lose their power a bit when you mass them as much. So if you have like 18 Ghosts and you have some Colossus, you have some Banelings, these Ghosts are not going to be having such a good time. All these changes together, there are a couple of things I am worried about. I am worried about the state of Zerg versus Terran. We're going to get a buff to Muras, Mura Link Bane, a buff just a straight up Bane play, Microbial Shroud. And the only thing that Terran really gets is that siege tanks can no longer be abducted, a slight Viking decrease, and then you could say Ghost, less supply, but at the same time, Ghost significantly more vulnerable as well. So I think late game ZVT is going to be very difficult to play, in my mind at least. And yeah, that is something that I am worried about seeing these patch notes, where I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out. Like with Microbial Shroud around, high Baneling numbers, maybe the tanks not being capable of being abducted means that Terrans get better at turtling, which I don't think is something that's a goal that, you know, should be chased. That shouldn't be one of the dreams, I think. It's like, oh, I wish we had more turtle Terrans. Like, no, I wish we had less. I wish we had more aggressive games. So I'm really curious how that's all gonna work out. I can't really say that. When it comes to PvZ, I think PvZ late game is going to be very interesting to watch. I have no clue what the unit composition is going to be. In my mind, Ultras will be extremely strong due to Immortals dealing half damage once Microbial is out, which is insane. So I'd love to see that. I think Baneling attacks will be very, very key as well. I am kind of sad that Storm is still going to be like our main crutch to stay alive. Like, it seems like all roads kind of lead to Storm at the end of the day in PvZ. And I feel like in Protoss versus Terran, Protoss is actually just a little bit stronger than we were before. And I feel like Protoss was doing absolutely fine in the PvT matchup. I think a Ghost supply reduction, although it is nice, doesn't really target the spot in PvT that I think was hardest for Terran, which is the mid-game economy situation. Terran felt like they couldn't really get out on the map without dying to storms. I think that is still going to remain the same. On top of that, Colossi are going to be much better against Ghost. Disruptors are a little bit stronger as well. So I think PvT either is going to have the same kind of win percentages or even tilt slightly further in Protoss' favor, which I think it already was slightly in Protoss' favor. Early game is going to be tougher though due to the energy recharge. So I guess that is one thing that we shouldn't forget to mention. Overall, I mean, it went freaking fast. We went from PTR 1 into PTR 2, and then a third adaptation, which is Dispatch, never went onto any type of test server and just straight into live. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm a big fan personally of testing stuff before you play it. So I would have loved to play this version of the game as well on a PTR server and then see what the outcomes were. And then maybe Blizzard would want to change something. A lot of bugs have been fixed as well out of Blizzard. This is a huge list of bug fixes. Some of them actually have significant balance implications as well. I think the Brute Lord now functions as an actual unit again. Like, look how many there are. Holy crap. Some of them are more impactful than others. So we also need to kind of keep an eye on that. Like, bug fixes can have large implications for balance. And specifically the Brute Lord one from the videos that I've seen is that it looked pretty okay. Now as a unit, so that is interesting too. But yeah, it's very hard for me to predict what's going to happen, but my feeling is that PvT is going to be further in the direction of TOS. PvZ, I think, late game will swing back in favor of Zerg a little bit, and more ultra heavy compositions in my mind, and TvZ, I think, will be significantly further Zerg favored. This is what I believe. Please tell me what you believe, and yeah, I'm curious to actually hear what you guys believe about this patch. If you've played any games yet, how have they been going? Let me know in the comments. Send me your replays. harstemsemail@gmail.com. If you have some cool games, like, look at these new abilities, man. Can't abduct the tanks. That's great. Microbial Shroud on Ultras. Double thumbs up. Show it to me, and love you all. Bye-bye.